Thank you for joining me. I'm Jake Parker, Senior Publishing Manager at Kwalee. Good morning. I hope you've been enjoying the Hyper Games conference so far. It's been a pleasure to be a part of it. I was in an app on an App Annie panel yesterday, which was a real pleasure. And today I'm going to talk a bit about the evolution of hypercasual. So where we've come from as far back as 2014, as far back as I could go, and how hypercasual games have developed since then, with a bit more information on things you can consider for ideation and design of hypercasual games moving forward. Before I dig into it, though, I'll give a brief introduction of Kwalee. So who are we? We're the UK's biggest hypercasual games publisher with over 650 million downloads. Our headquarters is in Leamington Spa with teams in Bangalore, Beijing, Turkey, and remote workers worldwide. So the team is now more than 130 members, I believe 160, more than 160 now. More than 160 team members worldwide. And we're still hiring. We're hiring for many, many more. So if you're interested in working in hypercasual or PC and console, check us out, go on the website and have a look at the openings that we've got. So on to the content of the talk. So firstly, I'm going to talk a bit through how hypercasual games have evolved from as far back as 2014, and then look at essentially from that what we can deduce that hypercasual is now, and then some considerations to make for success in prototyping, in ideating, and designing hypercasual games. So I'll start with 2014, and the reason I'm starting here is Flappy Bird. Really, it's a simple, easy to understand game that had huge virality and was one of the first big ad monetized successes. Alongside that, 2048, super simple puzzle game, easy to understand. So both of these kind of comply with what we see hypercasual as and what hypercasual seemed to be at the time. So ad monetized, simple controls, score-based progression at the time, and endless progression. The objective would be to beat your highest score or to beat the furthest distance that you could get. Typically, these games were played with one hand in portrait mode, just 2D at this point, but still accessible, still innovative, and still satisfying to play. That satisfaction came from minor elements of the VFX and gameplay and the feel of the game, as well as the satisfaction of beating your previous score, beating your friends. On to 2015, so 2 of the 25 most downloaded games are hypercasual, and we have Crossy Road and Agar.io here. So I've included Agar.io, even though it's landscape, which we all know is often avoided in hypercasual. I've included it because it's an indication of this kind of multiplayer IO gameplay that rose and then fell again, but still we see this kind of competition, this challenge element in a lot of successful hypercasual games today. Crossy Road as well, easy to understand, a big audience. Both of these games, all the games that I'm highlighting here, are appealing to a huge audience. There's nothing about them that kind of segments them to a specific audience, which is another key element of hypercasual games. On to 2016, so 3 of the most downloaded games are hypercasual, and we're starting to see some minimalism, so things like simple shapes, simple environments, and simple colors that are used to essentially help engaging and fun gameplay stand out and excel. The draw of these hypercasual games is it's fun and engaging gameplay that's easy to kind of step into when you've got a few moments to spare. 2017, we start to see a bigger presence of hypercasual, and 2017 also is the year that AppLovin named hypercasual games. So we see Landscape again on this list with June, which was a success at that point. But I think this is one of the last times we kind of see landscape games working effectively in the hypercasual space. Still a lot of kind of score-based or endless games. So Snake versus Block is a good example. Get as far as you can and then start again. On to 2018 then, where 11 of the 25 most downloaded games are hypercasual. So you can already see there's quite a substantial growth between 2016 to 2017, and then on to 2018, and that shows no signs of stopping. With 2018 came a lot of physicality in these games, so looking at more 3D games and more elements of gameplay that lean into using physicality, breaking objects in the environment, or 2D games where you're manipulating the world around 2D objects that are affected by physics. So things like Happy Glass, for instance, where you're diverting all of the water into the glass to fill it up. We also start to see some characterful games, so things like Run Sausage Run, Baseball Boy, with protagonist characters and characters that you're controlling as a player, with a little bit of character, but still something widely accessible. It's not leaning too much into building out a full character, but something that is easy to pick up, easy to understand, and characters that don't require too much investment from the player. We also see the move from this endless progression to level progression, level-based progression, and I think that gives a good sense of where hypercasual has moved to now, where players feel a lot more rewarded when you see, okay, I've moved from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. There's a sense of progression there. There's a feeling of purpose to the gameplay, and a feeling like the time that you've spent playing the game hasn't been wasted. You're not being reset to the start. You're progressing through. You're seeing something new, whether it's a new environment or new levels and new gameplay elements. On to 2019. 14 of the 25 most downloaded games are hypercasual. We're seeing more physicality in a lot of these games. So Collar Bump, where you're manipulating a ball in an environment and knocking all of the physics objects around you back. Run Race, where you're racing against opponents and using the environment around you, and there's a sense of physicality in that. Fun Race, so Fun Race and Run Race, I always get those two mixed up. But Fun Race, where you're Wipeout style, kind of tapping and holding to run past these obstacles. If you get hit, there's a sense of physicality to the world interacting with you as a player. There's also a lot of kind of innovative 2D games in this time. So in 2019 was when we launched Draw It, which the core mechanic for Draw It was to, excuse me, I've just lost connection to my screen. There we go, all fixed. So the core mechanic of Draw It was to essentially draw one of two objects as fast and as accurately as you can, so that an AI recognized it, you get a point, and you want to beat the other opponents that you're playing against. So overall, 2019, more physicality and these kind of cheat the game mechanics. So Aquapark had jumping off the side and landing further down the track to beat your opponents. Draw It, there was a kind of element of learning to draw as quickly as you can and like finding the most efficient way of drawing the thing that you're getting the AI to guess. On to 2020. So 12 of the most downloaded games are hypercasual. Some characterful 2D, some real world physicality. So things like wood turning and spiral roll, where we're seeing these physical moments essentially and feelings of physicality that you see in the real world. So planing some wood and seeing that spiral off, or carving wood on a lathe and seeing chips of wood flying off, that sense of physicality growing in games, and Tangle Master as well, giving that sense of real world physicality, this idea of interacting with physics objects in the same way that they would, and they react in the same way that they would in the real world. As well as that, 2D was quite characterful with games like Save the Girl, where you're kind of going through these story-based levels and choosing the right solution to a problem. Save the Girl is quite an interesting one, alongside Pull the Pin, whereby the gameplay was often shown in ads within games for other games. It was games like Garden Sketch would show these ads for pulling the pin, getting to the right thing. I think we've all seen them. We still see them now occasionally. But that then led to publishers and developers trying the same kind of concept, the same kind of idea, the same gameplay that was fun and seemed to be working as hyper-casual games, and it saw some success. So it's interesting to note that ideas for hyper-casual games can come from anywhere, even the ads within hyper-casual games. On to 2021. So 16 of the most downloaded games, the 25 most downloaded games are hyper-casual. And we're seeing even more physicality, this sense of like feminine themes. I think I've tried to avoid in this what is hyper-casual at the side here, listing off subgenres of hyper-casual. So things like ASMR, things like runners, things like excuse me, crafting games, etc. Because that list would then become pretty endless, especially if I went through more than just the 25 most downloaded games. It's interesting to see this sense of physicality growing and growing. Things like Blob Runner, where the core gameplay is avoid the bad things, get the good things. But throughout the gameplay, there's this sense of physicality where you're losing parts of your player character and then regaining them, and it all has this nice kind of physical effect on the character. So hyper-casual now, what is a hyper-casual game? I expect a lot of people here at the Hyper Games conference know what a hyper-casual game is or have a good, strong idea. The good news is a hyper-casual game is almost anything. You can see even from this selection of like 6 games, there's a lot of variation in what a game can consist of. And it's quite clear that hyper-casual games need easy to understand controls. They need to be 3D or 2D, but mostly 3D. They need a strong sense of progression, an accessible theme in order to scale up to as many users as possible. It's worth keeping in mind that your audience it's not gamers, it's not children, it's not adults, it's a huge spectrum of interests. So an accessible theme and accessible gameplay is essential for allowing your game to scale. As well as that, people want to see innovative gameplay. They want to see something that they haven't necessarily seen before, something that stands out from the crowd, that helps them to justify spending a few minutes playing that game and stepping away from their life to enjoy playing a hyper-casual game. There's also a sense of satisfaction in the visuals, a sense of satisfaction in play, and a strong sense of physicality. So those are kind of the core elements of hyper-casual games. There are more that I can't kind of include on the slide or go into more detail about right now. It would take too long. I could talk for hours. But you can kind of combine them with any subgenre that you can think of. So things like ASMR, things like runners, things like hyper-casual puzzles, crafting games, first-person action games. It's worth looking at what new games are being released and what kind of subgenres and gameplay they fit into, as well as looking what is scaling at and looking at what is in the top of the charts right now, so you can get a stronger understanding yourself as you're ideating and designing games. What's working at the moment, what's likely to work soon, what are we seeing a lot of, what kind of ideas will stand out from the crowd. So the bad news is that hyper-casual game is almost anything. The rules are always changing, as you can see from through the years. The rules of what a hyper-casual game is, the core constraints of developing a hyper-casual concept are always changing. These trends are shifting more rapidly with each year, with each month. And the market is so crowded that it's really important to stand out, but also quite hard to stand out. So it's worth understanding these fundamentals in order to apply those to every game idea and every game concept and every prototype that you're making to give it the best possible chance, and testing it at a point where you haven't invested too much time, but you've invested enough time to make the gameplay look as appealing as possible within that video. So on to some considerations then for design. So at the core, hyper-casual games are simple to play, accessible, and easy to understand. That's the definition of hyper-casual that most people know. It's the kind of surface level understanding of hyper-casual, make them simple to play, easy to understand, accessible. They're essential to making hyper-casual games, those core principles, but also they're not necessarily what makes a hyper-casual game great. In order to make a hyper-casual game great, you need to kind of go above and beyond that. So based on that definition, simple to play, accessible, and easy to understand. You can imagine a game where you control a dog and you're running across these platforms collecting coins. When you tap, you jump, you move to the next platform. It's simple to play, it's accessible. Who doesn't love dogs? It's easy to understand, but it is not a fun game to play. It's quite binary. All of the gameplay interactions are quite binary. It feels like the same thing over and over again. You're just tapping at the right time to jump and collect more coins. So it's worth considering things like input and reaction. So how do you add a sense of reaction within your game world to the input that your player is giving? So making your player feel as connected as possible to the changes, the animations, and the impact that they're having on the game world. So with Baker here, you can see like your movement of the piping bag defines where the batter lands, but also there's this sense of physicality, this real world physicality, where the batter, as it pours out, kind of curves along with the route that you're taking, and it's satisfying to watch as well. It's worth keeping that in mind. Like all of these things where the reaction within the game world is directly linked to your input, so it feels, from a player's perspective, their interaction feels seamlessly associated with that game interaction. It's something that feels satisfying when it all pays off. So another consideration is making collection physical. So there are a few ways that you can do this, and only a couple of examples here. So one is Crazy Shopping from 2019. And this has this sense of physicality with all the collection. You're picking up these objects, you're manipulating the environment, you're changing the world around you as a player. The choices you're making to run over here or run over there and collect all this stuff don't feel as binary, because you are having this impact on the environment and all these objects are bouncing around off of each other. And Cube Surfer as well has this strong sense of physical collection, where as you collect more objects, so ultimately the gameplay of Cube Surfer is quite similar to Snake versus Block, right? You're collecting a number, and then there's a number in front of you that you need to be higher than to get past, but it's presented in a totally different way that looks totally different and feels completely different. So you have this strong sense of physicality where with every cube that you collect, you kind of bounce higher, and that stack grows and the camera pulls out a little bit to add an impact to it. And also as a player, you're making these decisions to choose the smaller stack of red blocks to run into, and you kind of feel smart about that. You feel like you've made the right choice. Everything could have gone totally different if you hadn't made that choice, but ultimately it doesn't matter that much. The thing that's important is giving that sense of physicality that helps to make the player in their interaction feel connected with what's happening in the game world. Considering realistic interaction with the game world as well. So we've seen quite a lot of this, and this is only a couple of examples. In Wheel Race, you are manipulating your tire to size it up or size it down based on what is next on the track. And you can see how there's a kind of realistic interaction with the bigger thing knocks the bridge down, and the smaller thing gets across the turning cylinders faster. With Rope Around, you can see that there's this nice physicality to the rope. There's this rope physics here. So looking at simulating real world physics, or as close as you can, giving the feeling of realistic physics, can have a big impact and make your game feel great to play and look like it feels great to play. And ultimately, in the initial stages where you're testing for marketability, a game that looks fun, the core gameplay and that sense of fun, and essentially the player feels like they're going to get from playing the game, makes a huge difference. Challenge is the next consideration. So think about giving a light sense of challenge, a light challenge with a sense of freedom. And this in Makeover Studio incorporates, like you have this objective, you have these clear markers of where you want to be placing the highlight or the eyeshadow. but you have the freedom to paint anywhere on that face. So you give the players this constraint that they need to work within, but the freedom to not necessarily work within that. So there's the challenge to get it right, but also this sense of freedom where players can, if they want to, play around in any way they like and still progress. I think also this sense of freedom is seen in a lot of the games where you kind of feel like you've hacked it, you've outsmarted the game, where you've taken one route that you feel like you shouldn't be able to take. I mean, intentionally it's been included in the game, but as a player, you feel like you have taken a route that you maybe shouldn't have, or you've outsmarted the system, and as a result, you feel satisfied, you feel happy, you feel like you're clever for doing so. And it's worth leaning into that stuff with hyper-casual games and hyper-casual prototypes to keep them engaging and make sure that you are engaging your players and giving them a fun experience. On to some considerations for ideation. It's quite a challenging part of the hyper-casual space, just because of how rapidly trends are moving. But there are a few things that you can do to kind of keep on top of trends and what is happening and what's out there. Excuse me a second. So firstly, do your research. When you've got a concept, it's worth searching the App Store and using tools like Store Guide to see if there's a similar game already out there. See if somebody's done something like that before. If you want to make a basketball game, start by searching for and playing similar basketball games. Play the games that are similar. They might put you off your idea, or they might help you evolve the idea, or they could show issues with the controls or pacing that you want to fix with your prototype, your game. You can play these games and think, oh, I could do better than that. I know a way of making this moment feel way better. So it's worth doing that for any concept that you're working through. A, to make sure that you don't end up inadvertently cloning something, and B, to make sure that you're understanding what's already out there and making sure you're filling a gap for players and giving them something new, giving them something that is exciting to play. Consider the ad. This is critical at pretty much all stages. Firstly, clones are a waste of time. We know this. If your game is going to look in an ad exactly like another successful game, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle. So consider the ad, consider whether you can understand the gameplay, so the controls, the goal of the game, and the challenge by watching a 3-second ad. And if you can't do that, then go back to the drawing board, figure out a way of making that gameplay clearer within a few seconds of video. Ultimately, you want to think about how players are going to be consuming the ad as well as the game, because if the ad isn't successful, if the gameplay doesn't come across as something that a player wants to play, if the gameplay doesn't look fun, then you fall at the first hurdle, right? You don't necessarily get as many people into the game, so you don't get to understand how engaging that gameplay is. You don't necessarily progress with it if you don't consider the ad in the early stages throughout your design and think about how you can build moments of gameplay that feel and look great, that are merged perfectly with your core gameplay mechanic. And the core gameplay mechanic is a huge factor in hyper-casual games. And that all needs to be understandable within a few seconds of watching a video. It's a tough challenge, but it's achievable. Lean on your life for ideation as well. So look at things in your life that could be a game. Try, like, one thing we recommend is always be thinking, could this be a game? Is there a game in that? Think about hobbies, think about day-to-day activities, interactions with the world, and how those could be almost gamified, how you could turn that into a fun experience for someone to play. So Bake It is a perfect example of this. Everybody recognizes baking. You can turn it into a game. You can take these kind of core elements, find the fun part of it, find something that is visually satisfying, and then lean into that for a concept or a prototype. Excuse me 1 second. My next point, use a checklist. it seems simple, but it's easy to miss. It's worth using a checklist for ideas, for prototypes, and checking, like, when you're happy with an idea, run it through a checklist like this. So does a similar game already exist? This will prompt you to start playing similar games, recognizing where there is similar content already out there, similar gameplay or similar flow, and understand the flaws with what is already out there so that you can solve them with your prototype. Could you see your game in the top 5 charts? If the answer to that isn't a huge resounding no, why put development effort into it? Why spend time on something that you're not super confident will have the potential to reach the top of the charts? If you don't believe in it, then it's not necessarily worth pushing with that straight away. Can you understand the gameplay from a 3-second clip? So is it easy to understand? Is the gameplay accessible? And one thing you can do with this, because obviously as a developer, you might be quite close to the project, right? You see it, you understand it because you've been working on it. One thing you can do, because the audience for Hypercasual is so wide, it's children, it's adults, it's old people, it's men, it's women, it's everyone. You can try this out on other people in your life, friends, family, whoever. You can show them a short clip of your gameplay and see if they understand what is happening there, see if that's appealing to them, see if it looks fun, with very little context outside of that, because ultimately that's how an ad is shown, right? Can I play it with one hand in a relaxed pose? So hypercasual players are typically looking for a small escape. They're typically quite chilled out when they're playing these games. They're looking for a means of relaxation. They're on the toilet, they're in the middle of waiting for a bus, they're making a drink. And all of those situations are kind of sitting back with a relaxed pose, playing the game. If your gameplay feels like it needs you to really focus and it feels like it's quite stressful, so it's like a plate spinning mechanic where you've got to do all the things within the time, there's a high chance that it won't perform well in a test because it comes across as stressful. It looks like it's not going to be easy to play as in a kind of relaxed environment. And another check to look at is, what does level 30 look like? Is it still fun to play the game after 30 levels, or does the gameplay get stale? Does the gameplay seem to kind of wear thin as you keep playing? This helps you to consider, like, once the game is tested and it's aced it for CPI, you've got a really low CPI, how do you build the rest of the game? How do you add this engagement? How do you build in this meta? How do you make sure that the game is still fun? And ultimately that should rely quite heavily, in the same way that the gameplay mechanic itself is critical for CPI, it's critical for engagement as well. The mechanic is the thing that will help your game to excel. Make data-driven decisions. So not only in working through new games and new prototypes that have performed well in tests and working through those, make data-driven decisions on excuse me. So not only when working through new prototypes, make data-driven decisions on things like CPI and CTR of previous prototypes. Like, is there something that came close, but you could try a completely new spin on it that uses the same code base, but you've got a template there, right? You've got a template that had kind of okay CPI. Let's try something completely new. Let's try a new theme. Let's try a new spin on that could potentially excel because it has that new theme, and that theme is way more accessible than the original. Look at things like retention and engagement of prototypes and games that have performed really well, so that you can understand how engaging that gameplay is, what elements of the gameplay made that engaging. Is it the upgrades that you included that allowed you to improve the retention and the engagement? Is it new levels? Is it new gameplay mechanics that you introduced slowly over time that helped to improve the performance of that game? And of course, look at the LTV. I mean, that's in the later stages when you've published your game, that's essential, right? Get feedback. Get feedback is hugely important. So get feedback from friends, family based on a short video clip. Make sure it's easy to understand. Make sure it's accessible by talking to people who don't necessarily play games and showing them it, asking whether it's something that's appealing or engaging. As well as that, talk to publishers, talk to developers who are working in the space and have this experience and this knowledge and insights that you might not necessarily have while working on your game. So that covers the bulk of my my talk. On to some exciting news from Kwalee. So we have a publishing portal coming soon. We're just ironing out some last stage challenges with it, and that will enable developers to sign up through our website and test games with us, get visibility of KPIs, CPI, CTI, etc., and work with the team quite closely to understand the performance of games, but also get access to insights from our design team, our research team, our data science team. As well as that, Hypercasual Heroes, a challenge that we are running, is coming soon. So details of this will be on our website shortly. And the challenge will be running from June to August. So submit your game or video for testing and design feedback. If it's approved, we'll test for marketability. We'll give payments based on test results and publishing agreements based on test results, as you might expect. Work with then you'll want to work with the Kwalee publishing team, the design team, UA, monetization. So you'll have the full team working on your game to test and iterate and ensure the game performs as well as possible. And naturally, the next step is a hit game. So a quick look at some of the thresholds for the challenge and the payments that we're offering for this. So with a CPI of 30 cents or less, we can give $500, 25 cents or less, $1,000, 19 cents or less, $5,000, 15 cents or less, $20,000, and 8 cents or less, $50,000. In addition to the publishing revenue share, the minimum guarantees and payments for the publishing agreement. So I'm excited to see the new games that come through from that challenge. I'm excited to hear from you guys about how you're working on ideating and designing games in the early stage, and obviously very excited to share some of the feedback and insights that Kwalee can offer. So get in touch, contact us on the publishing@kwalee.com address, or head over to the website.